Right. Ladies and gentlemen, it's quarter to 11, and I think it might be about time to get the show on the road. Hello, Richard. I'll just stop getting the show on the road and give you a couple of moments to settle in. Just give us a couple of minutes. Right, ladies and gentlemen, here we are, and I think everybody's coming who's coming, and welcome to this meeting of the Planning Communities EAP. It's going to be an interesting, slightly hybrid meeting. As you will see from the agenda, we have one item on the Resilience and Innovation North Hants which of course is highly topical at the moment with the amount of rainfall, the amount of saturation of ground, and of course a number of recent flooding events. And we're saying this in the middle of the happy month of January, so we've still got a couple of months of winter weather outstanding. So I'm looking forward to that. We will, after the close of the formal meeting, we will, as I think you're all aware, have a discussion, a member workshop for the National Planning Policy Framework, which of course has been revised by the new government, and the implications that the NPPF and new government policies will have for the work we're doing on the local plan review. So I'm sure that will be remarkably interesting and stimulating discussion as well. So welcome one and all, and let's just move quickly to agenda item 1, and that is apologies for non-attendance, please.
Thank you, Chair. We received apologies from Councillor Jenny Bone.
Thank you. I think I've received apologies also from Councillor Sedwin Brown. There's been a couple of changes on the committee. I believe that Councillor Brown has been appointed in the lieu of Councillor Ken Harrington because the political balance requirements have changed, and Councillor Harrington is not now a member of this committee, and I'm sure that we would all like to wish him well in his new political guise, and thank him for all that he did in his contributions on this EAP. And I did write to him last night and thanked him on behalf of the committee for all that he's done, and he's kindly responded. So that's nice. Okay, agenda item 2. Members' declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? No? Okay, thank you. Excellent. Well, now, as is always the case with these meetings, we will whiz through the agenda until we actually get to something substantive, which can keep us going till about midnight. And we'll move on to agenda item 4, which...
Chair.
Sorry?
Item 3, minutes. The last
Oh, I always do that. I always do that. Yes, well, I mean, I don't know why. I think it's subconscious. I don't want to see what we talked about last time. But, however, the minutes of the meeting held on the 13th of November are with you. And are there any comments as to their accuracy? Okay, in that case, I guess we can note those minutes. Thank you. Yeah. Excuse me? So you're very good, Councillor North. We'll bear that in mind. Well, and it's the 15th. Thank you. Lovely. Right, we're getting back on track. We'll move to the agenda item 4. As said, it's a presentation which will be started by Simon Richardson here to discuss resilience and innovation in Northamptonshire, and it is, as I said, very topical in connection with all that's been happening. So I'm particularly interested in this. And Simon, if you'd like to start us off, we'd be grateful.
Thank you, Chair. Morning, members. So the purpose of this briefing or report is to bring to members' attention the Rain Flood Resilience Initiative for Harpers Brook and to give the Council's involvement in that some form of governance in its progression. If I could, before kicking off fully though, introduce Sarah Parr to my left, who's with me. She is the project manager for RAIN, and she's here to discuss in more detail the work that's being undertaken and the proposed projects planned for implementation, in particular across North Northamptonshire within the Harpers Brook catchment. So from there, if I turn to, I'll kick off with paragraph 4.1 if you're following. So what is RAIN? So RAIN stands for Resilience and Innovation North Hants. It works with communities in the Harpers Brook and Wootton Brook catchments, that being in West North Hants. And it's to trial a holistic approach to flood resilience measures. It tackles that in three broad forms. It looks across the overall catchment area, working with the natural landscape to slow the rate at which water runs off the landscape towards communities downstream. The second element is within specific communities to provide training, events and volunteering opportunities to help improve resilience. I suppose that's resilience to flooding, but also the resilience and awareness of those residents that may be affected by flooding. And then within properties to provide advice and educating property owners of the use of property flood resilience measures. So to give you some measure as to where exactly we're talking about, it's not all that far from here actually, is it? So we're looking at Harpers Brook that rises near to Pipwell. It passes South Corby, Newton and Little Oakley and Rushton and Stannion, but to a greater degree directly impacts on, at times, on Brigstock, Sudborough and Lowick. So at 4.2 there's a plan there, and hopefully you can see the extent there, the darker shadowing of the catchment of that brook. So my description of certain elements of it is it's not much more than a small stream in places, but it's certainly not a small stream when it's in flood. It's far more than that. So the project team, the RAIN project team, is working towards implementing resilience actions to provide preventative measures, working with the natural environment to install natural flood management, working with farmers and other landowners in the upstream area to slow or reduce the flow. So this catchphrase, slow the flow, comes about. The RAIN project is one of 25 funded by DEFRA and is part of a £200 million flood and coastal resilience innovation programme. I've only just found out that's FCRIP, I think. Yeah, good, thank you. So then, learning from each of the project, one of the benefits of our involvement beyond direct offer of advice and projects is to learn from each of the project areas, and that will be shared amongst all. So we'll be sharing our outputs and our learnings and results, as we'll be able to also capture from other authority areas and other catchments. So I'm at paragraph 4.8. The overall aim of the project is to engage with landowners, communities and individuals throughout these two catchments, that being Wootton Brook and Harpers Brook. Part of RAIN's approach is to convert unproductive areas of agricultural land into vibrant wetland ecosystems, offering significant benefits to wildlife and to the local communities through protection against flooding. Particularly the case upstream of Brigstock, where hydraulic modelling has shown online and offline storage to slow the flow. The RAIN project is designed to provide benefits through trial and improve flood resilience in communities. The trial and innovation side to that is that I think what's being learnt is that you can come up with an idea, you can come up with the plans and proposals to how to improve an area and protect an area, but it's a difficult thing to be overly confident that is always going to be successful to the extent that you hope it is. So that's where the trial element kicks in. And that's why I think it's so important to undertake that study in the first instance, to try to ensure that you have the right evidence to give you the best outcomes at the end of the day. So then over the page, it's to improve on evidence and benefits of natural flood management and property flood resilience. So that's where the NFM, Natural Flood Management, and PFR, Property Flood Resilience, comes in, and that weaves its way into the report elsewhere. RAIN's Property Flood Resilience scheme has involved surveying over 100 eligible homes across the Harpers Brook and Wootton Brook catchments, offering measures to properties that haven't flooded but are shown to be at risk. The RAIN team held flood mobile events in each catchment with the Environment Agency and Flood Mary, which is an ambassador for the property flood resilience area of work. RAIN is now procuring an installation company to deliver the fully funded flood resilience measures, and you'll see some details on costings there at paragraph 4.14. The RAIN team has also secured extra funding to carry out a survey and install measures to Harpers Court in Brigstock. RAIN is also working with residents and the community to create a flood plan for the site. So I'm moving now to paragraph 4.21. A site has been identified as having a real impact for the communities downstream. This is the Brigstock Wetland Hectare. A local hydraulic model has been developed by HR Wallingford Partners in the project. This full process is detailed in Appendix 1, so it's quite a lumpy piece of work there. Options were explored, and it was viewed that bunding and online storage of water on this site could benefit properties downstream. Ecology Link Limited was commissioned to undertake an ecological assessment, so an important element of this work, given that it does involve some changes to the landform, but having had a look through the Wallingford piece of work, there's some recognition as to how far you tip that before it then starts falling into more strategic category rather than it being a local measure to protect a local area. There will be some loss of habitat, the conclusion was found to the ecological assessment, but the temporary impacts will be mitigated by the increase in habitat diversity of the proposed works. Then turning to paragraph 4.28 myself. So further ecological surveys are being sought to ensure bird nesting water voles and amphibians are not being disturbed during the works. To measure the success of the Brigstock Wetland Hectare, a series of monitoring, evaluation and assessments will be carried out. Gauges will be installed imminently to monitor the flow before and after any implemented measures. It's also planned to install cameras to view when the measures are in action through high rain levels. It is a fairly new concept and still can be very trial and error, as I indicated earlier. Extensive research has shown that NFM works best in quantity. So with this in mind, a further 3 sites have been identified across Harper Brook catchment. All are at the feasibility and modelling stage. So the expectation or desire is that combined, those collectively will start to have a greater impact on protecting communities downstream. Nature-based solutions have also been created where the community planted a tiny forest of 760 trees to reduce surface water runoff. So another separate initiative, but brings out further benefits to the local area and the flow of that water channel. RAIN has funded and supported a move to more regenerative agriculture practices on farms across the Harpers catchment. This includes hectares of cover cropping, meadow planting, green fencing and tree planting. I know in detail what tree planting is, but I'm sure Sarah will be able to enlighten us more in terms of some of the cover cropping. I do know a bit, and it becomes very interesting as to how simple solutions can go about having significant benefits to areas. So if then I turn to timeline, and if I look at this year, 2025, you can see in the previous years the activity and the work that's been taking place to prepare ourselves for this position, but it's the creation of Brigstock wetland hectare, further ecological survey works, feasibility studies on 3 more Harpers Brook farms and creation of these measures. So then finally I turn to the conclusions, and you'll see there's various conclusions there, but the two I turn to is the Council's ongoing support of the RAIN project, helps build resilience to flooding and climate change across the Harpers Brook. I know this is the first report that we've brought to this EAP on RAIN, and I think it's something that it's of benefit to further highlight and demonstrate the role the council has to play in supporting and directing some of this work. So the final point is around RAIN provides an opportunity to cement relationships, build on the positive lessons in this initiative, and to be rolled out to other communities affected or at risk of flooding. So it doesn't necessarily have to be Harpers Brook that learns and benefits in the future, or the catchment, I should say. And it's suggested that the RAIN team continue to engage, returning to the planning community's EAP to provide updates on the progress being made at appropriate points in time. That was the introduction to the item I was seeking to make, Chair. I'm sure that both myself and Sarah will be very happy to engage in discussions and answer any questions members may have.
Well, thank you very much, Simon, and thank you very much, Sarah, and all the team at RAIN. It's something I very much welcome. We have various little pinch points where we've had serious flooding events, and Harpers Brook is one of them. And of course, there's been flooding in the Oakley area of Corby. There's been considerable flooding in Brigstock and Sudborough. So all these projects that improve resilience and, of course, also raise awareness and coordination with landowners, who are terribly important in this, are very much to be welcomed. So I enormously welcome the work that's going on here. I'm going to ask a question about how the whole RAIN project might be upscaled, because at the moment it's a trial and it's in 2 particular areas, and I wonder how that might spread out across the catchment area, but anyway in Northamptonshire. Before we go to questions and discussion, I just wonder, Sarah, if you'd like to say anything at this stage, or would you just like to take the incoming?
I'll just take the incoming.
Perfect. In that case, Anne, I think I saw your hand.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this is a very interesting project. Great. I'm just wondering what you mean by the flood team, because Sarah, we very sadly lost Sarah from this county and she's gone to West Northants. Our flood officer is not here at the moment. I checked if he's still around. I sent him an email to check, and I wondered why he's not here, not even on video. I think he's a long way away from here, not on holiday. He's based a long way away from here. We need more people. This Flood Mary, I hadn't heard of her before. Is she an employee of North Northampton Council? I mean, who is this? Who does this team comprise of? And because I think our team is very sadly lacking in human resources, although this report amply illustrates how badly we need officers who can deal this and take this further.
I'll bring Graham in a second, but Flood Mary is actually a project, which it's not a person. It's a project that improves householder and communities that are maybe affected by flooding to defend their houses and their properties against flooding. So they have things like smart bricks and, you know, gasketed doorways and, you know, things like that can be specific defences for a particular property. And they have certainly, I mean, I've seen them at Brigstock, and, you know, they certainly do assist in community resilience. Of course, it's a much wider area, and flooding involves, to be sure, the council, and I'll bring Graham in a second, but it also involves other stakeholders. It involves the Environment Agency, it involves landowners and riparian landowners who have responsibility for maintenance of their part of a river or a stream, and it involves Anglian Water and other organisations who have a lot of involvement in, you know, drains, gullies, and so forth. Yeah, go ahead.
You would need someone to coordinate it and to chase them, because they need to be chased up all the time. I know that very well. There
are a number of bodies which do coordinate this. And then, anyway, I'll bring Graham in, and then I might add a little bit afterwards. Graham.
Thank you, Councillor Brackenbury. Thank you for the question. You're absolutely right, Councillor Brackenbury. Of course, particularly when it comes to flooding, but with many things that we do, we talk about a wider team collective involving a number of different people, not all of whom might be directly employed by the council. So you're right, we're very lucky that we work in partnership with Sarah. She's not employed by North Northampton, but she is part of our wider team. And there are other partnerships that we would refer to as being part of that team, the Environment Agency, with whom we were meeting only 2 hours ago, Anglian Water as well. So we all work and coordinate together to try and address flooding, which, as you say, is so important to our communities. At the moment, we don't employ flood officers. I've explained this previously. We don't have flood officers within our employment and structure. That's because we didn't have anybody and we needed the resource, so we've got that from externally. And we do have people to carry out exactly the roles that you've just talked about there, coordinating people, taking forward our strategies and plans. Simon and I were just catching up earlier about the work that those individuals are doing for us on our plans and strategies. So we have resource to do this work, even if they're not directly employed by North Northamptonshire. Now, that's a short-term solution. The intention is for that to be a short-term solution whilst we get our new structure in place. And as I've updated members who sit in the Planning Improvement Board, we're going through the proposals now of what the structure will look like for the planning service and the whole growth and regeneration service. And that will include employed resources to work on flooding. But we're not there yet, and we're working through that process. So I suppose, in essence, we had an option of not having anybody to call on to do the work that you explored there, or use external resource. And we've chosen to use external resource to plug the gap for the short term, whilst we look to employ flood officers directly within our team as we move forward with the restructure. But I want to reassure you, as I've done previously, we do have people working on this, as you can see from the paper that's been brought forward today and the other work that we've been talking about this morning in another forum, as I say, with the Environment Agency and Anglian Water on other locations that are also affected by flooding.
And just following on from that, we are actually quite strategically engaged in working with partners up and down the whole Nene catchment area and the wider geography. I mean, Mr. Kane and I sit on the Nene Water Management Strategy Board. We're on the strategic sponsoring group. As you know, I sit, and Councillor Andy Mercer sits on the Northern Anglian Flooding and Coastal Committee. So it isn't that we are ignoring the issue, because it's a really topical issue and it really affects a lot of communities up and down North Northamptonshire. Mr. Kane and I and Mr. Richardson just came from a strategic meeting with Anglian Water, the Environment Agency, and Member of Parliament, Mr. Barron, and a number of councillors to discuss strategic flooding resilience and what we might be able to do about it throughout Northamptonshire. So it isn't something we are in any way ignoring. It's something that's strategically really important, and we're engaging with the best people we possibly can. Anyway, but Anne, thank you for raising it, because I appreciate it's a matter of concern, and communications with communities is really important. So I'll be in Brigstock on Thursday, communicating, and then we have a meeting regarding Slade Brook and Eastbrook Culvert in Kettering coming up. So, Mark, then, well, everyone, I'll go round the table.
Go around the table.
Anyway, Mark, over to you.
First. You're all right. Thank you, Chair. A couple of things, actually. It's obviously, this is really very interesting from our point of view. I wanted to ask a question based on 4.3. Just someone can, probably Simon could actually help me on this one. It's the first paragraph right at the bottom where it says, Anglian Water and Nestle are invited to joint fund measures in a reverse type auction. Not quite sure what a reverse type auction is. That's the first part. The second really is, I know several people in Brigstock. I don't know Brigstock that well, but the bridge in Brigstock, I think they call it, is it Harper's Brook Court? There's a block of flats there, floods every time. And the last time it happened, I was sent a picture by a friend of mine there, and there was a bloody great big tree that had come down river and was blocking 2 of the 3 arches of the bridge, which obviously didn't help on the flow of water. So I guess the question for that is, as I understand it, nobody would take responsibility for clearing the tree, or it wasn't their tree. So, I do wonder if we're getting floods like this and we're getting branches and trees and things coming down, it's obviously going to be a natural barrier to any bridge. Who is actually responsible for clearing that debris pretty quickly in order to keep the flow going through? So that was the other question.
Okay, I'll go through the Nestle question. It took me a long time to get my head around the lens. It's called the Landscape Enterprise Network, where it was part of our outline business case that we would trial a new way to pay for natural flood management. And one of those ways was to go through this, what they call a reverse auction, where we sit in the room with Nestle, PepsiCo, Anglian Water. There are people called supply aggregators that go out to the farmers and they try and establish what either natural flood management, cover cropping, regenerative agriculture practices that these people in these big companies will pay for. We were included in that because we wanted to do the natural flood management. And what we were hoping for within that room was to have joint funding by these large, what they call demand parties. So we're a demand party in that room. We don't pay for all of our natural flood management through there, but sometimes it still is quite a good process to go to. Anglian Water have joint funded a few things with us. Unfortunately, the big corporates like PepsiCo and Nestle, as much as it's good to be in that room and to learn from them and then for them to learn from us and what we need, we haven't had any joint funding from them. So we have stepped away a little bit from the Landscape Enterprise Network, and we're currently putting together our own local business network where local businesses can pay. Instead of asking for a lot of money from the big corporates, we'll be asking for a very small amount of money, where any businesses can choose a project that they want to pay a small amount of money to build climate resilience in their area. And that's something we're in the process of at the moment. And yeah, directly learned from the corporates weren't going to joint fund anything with us. What was the other one?
I think we were just talking about the famous tree that dammed the bridge at Brigstock. I'm not aware of specifically that incident. Did you want to?
I don't know that I think it's a difficult question to answer because it does start to cross into riparian issues. That tree came from somewhere and lands somewhere, and there's a responsibility on those that border, this is my understanding, those that border the brook, that they're accountable for to the centre point of that brook. But if that tree has come from somewhere else, are you accountable for the debris that's flown come in via that source? I think in emergency situations, because that's what occurs in those instances, it falls to all parties because we recognise that, and we've already talked about the relationship that we have with the Environment Agency, the various areas of the local authority, not just the local lead flood element, which falls within this area, but also the emergency planning element. So there's an element of responsibility to tackle those issues as they arise in an emergency. If you were stepping back, I would say it comes down to the riparian responsibilities of each of the landowners. So hopefully that covers the point. And that's not the only one. I've come across very recently news of another tree that had come down and caused flooding as a result of it blocking because it couldn't get through a bridge. It blocks the bridge and it backs up and it enters. Oops, excuse me. Enters into properties that otherwise have never flooded as a result.
It is interesting because riparian responsibilities are important, but to what extent is a riparian responsibility responsible for debris that they create, which might come up against a bridge 3 miles away, completely outside the land they own? I don't know the answer to that, but it's certainly an interesting question. Who's responsible for debris? You own a piece of land, a tree comes down, goes in the river, ends up 3 miles away up against a bridge. Is it your responsibility as riparian owner to remove it, or is it where it's ended up's responsibility?
Yes. Yeah. I can come back on this, Chair. I raise this because this is really important. We're spending all this money, we're doing rain, we're doing all this. That is, for me, is a prime example of causing flooding or being part of a cause of a flood. Now, we can put all the mitigate all these measures in and pay a lot of money doing this just for Harpers Brook in particular, for a tree to come down, block the bridge, it floods, it comes over, and the houses are all flooded again. And so I think it's a really important issue, I think, that we have to identify how that can be progressed in the future. What we can't have is putting all these measures in for somebody's debris to come down 3 miles, block this, and nobody will take responsibility to remove it ASAP, and it sits there for a week, flooding other houses out. So I think it's really important.
No, I completely agree with you. Did you want to touch on that, Simon?
Yes. So Sarah's been involved in some of the floods. So when they've occurred, she's gone out, and other members of the team have gone out to see. So she's shared with me that firsthand that in those instances, the Environment Agency are stepping forward and taking responsibility. It's that emergency situation, I think, at the end of the day. It still doesn't take away the riparian element to things, but in terms of that emergency situation and the availability, access to the necessary kit, because the likes who wants to step into anywhere near any of that water as it's passing and lift heavy items away, if they've got the kit, then Environment Agency are taking ownership of that element.
Well, I mean, you really need to get the expertise, because, I mean, it's not always a very safe environment. You need the expertise, you need the necessary kit, and if you have to send the bill to the riparian owner in due course, get on with it. But in the meantime, clear the obstruction as quickly as may be. Okay, no, thank you, Mark. Yeah.
One more, if I may, just to finish off on that. So one of the areas that we are involved in as local lead flood authority is undertaking investigations. So there's Section 19 investigations that are undertaken, and that provides the opportunity to go back and look at all the detail, look at the causes, look at the actions, and a full extensive report comes back on each reported flood incident that results in damage to property. There is a threshold. I think that's 5 properties, but I tend to think that actually we lower that threshold because we recognise the significance of those. So that would be helpful in identifying whether there are any measures that can be taken earlier in the process to prevent those incidents becoming worse.
Thank you, and thank you, Mark, because I mean I think you raise a really important point there, and it is something we will keep in mind. But yeah, the Reg 19 report is something that you can use to assign liability at a future date. But it's often weeks after the event, so we shall see. But it is useful. Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of questions and a couple of comments as well on my part. The first bit, I think, understanding in relation to whether we are one council, of course, one area, but there are obviously other parts of North Northants that have been flooded, and I couldn't work out in relation to why this particular area one is the concentration on this particular compared to we've got obviously a number of other areas in North Northants that flood just as much. I didn't know, was this through some kind of process it actually became this one? I didn't quite understand where this particular one came out, although obviously it's our old council area, Chair, so I'm fully aware that that has been flooded, so I'm not questioning it. It's just how this came about to be this particular one. That's the first one. The other point I wanted to raise was 4.11, where specific issue in relation, the aim being in the catchment area, the main aim being to slow the rate of the way the water runs downstream. I would have thought, or probably from my point of view, it would have actually been dissipating that rate, those volumes completely, not actually just slowing the rate down. And I admit I haven't read all the reports, and I appreciate in relation to the tree planting and the wetlands, and that will absorb and take out some of the volume, but it's just in relation to slowing the rate down rather than actually reducing it completely, because it's still flowing, and if you're slowing it down, I thought one of the main things would be to take that water out completely. And some of the comments I've just made, obviously that does that with the tree planting and the wetlands and so forth. But just maybe a comment on that. And one of the other things, Chair, is and sort of round about 4.20 in relation to farmer to farmer engagement. Obviously they're aware of their riparian ownership. Not all farmers always do it, but one of my general concerns, and it's definitely not true, it's just that we're in this discussion we're facing a huge amount of pressure in North Northants in relation to solar panels, which are hard standing. And I did read one comment from a developer this morning that said, that it's fine, the rain runs off the panels and hits the ground below. Well, that's not a great deal of help if half the site is actually covered in hard-standing panels. And I'm not suggesting for one moment, and obviously keeping my options open in relation to any future planning meetings, but just in relation to, the awareness, I should say, in those farmer-to-farmer engagements, that the possibility that acres and acres of solar panels, and what that effect could have in relation to water runoff and volumes. I appreciate this is obviously not a planning committee, but I would certainly be aware of huge swathes of hard standing and the effects that would have in relation to water runoff and volumes. And with a project like this, and again, I'm only suggesting, if you had a sudden massive, huge, solar panel farm right at the top of the beginning of this project area, how that would have an impact in relation to this project. There's a lot of money is being used on this, and whether they can just go ahead with that anyway, and the consequences of that really doesn't matter to the huge amounts of money that's being spent trying to reduce the rain downstream. And I'm only suggesting, Chair, I'm not saying for one moment it is, but I can, as I said a few minutes ago, I can only imagine a huge area of extra hard standing that wasn't there before, if it was just pasture, what an effect that would have on water runoff in general. And I admit I haven't read all the report, but I don't really see anything there in the opening bit about how that engagement is going in the suggested issues around sudden changes to huge amounts of hard standing.
I think you...
That's just my free little...
No, thank you. And I think you raise a very important point. I'm quite interested in some of the substantial proposals for solar farm development, especially the very, very large strategic proposed development in the west of North Northamptonshire, which also includes parts of West Northamptonshire and indeed Buckinghamshire. Basically from Lavenden up to Old, it's about 17 miles. The 50-acre site for the substation and battery storage and so on, and various interlinks with the national grid, are in an area which is prone to surface water flooding and has had some surface water flooding already. So without in any way prejudging a massive planning application where all these issues will have to be taken into consideration, I think you raise a very valid point indeed. And it's not necessarily just solar farms, obviously. It's any form of substantial development which takes absorbent land, agricultural land, whatever, out of circulation and replaces it with concrete, means that any water that falls on it has to go somewhere else. So you raise a more general point, but I share your concern very much. I don't know if anybody wanted to touch on that or not. Or was it self-explanatory?
So, if I can say, I think the purpose of the report was more in terms of the RAIN project and the Harpers Brook initiative. And I think some of the points you raised, they are valid and relate more to issues of flooding and flood risk as a result of development, which the RAIN project isn't necessarily about in this instance. But I agree, I think the point is there, and it's a requirement on development to consume its own smoke in some ways. So that risk of that's caused by the ground not being able to absorb the water that falls on it through development needs to be considered through flood risk assessment in any planning proposals. So you would expect, given that the guidance around SUDS, that any development of that sort of scale would need to be providing its own solutions to accommodate the cause and the risks that may occur as a result. And I think what we'd always seek to achieve through that is that although that may result in an engineering solution, how can that solution be accommodated and also provide improvements in terms of habitat generation and biodiversity net gain as a result. So they are factors, and it's something that we would consider through the application process. And I know that we're having discussions ourselves around the need for further flood study work. So we're talking about water cycle studies and also the need to update on any flood risk strategic flood risk assessments or other works as a part of the policy generation side of things. So they are very much on our mind, but the focus here is around the RAIN project and the opportunities that we have to gain through that. In terms of the tree planting, I think there are measures that can be introduced to our landscapes that go and alongside other measures, help to contribute to reduce the risk of flooding, and it's always worth our while taking those on board and carrying them out. The thought, though, that you go about introducing tree planting, for example, or bring measures in, it's not always possible to capture all of the water that finds its way down some of these rivers, brooks and streams, because there is a vast amount of it. So it comes back then to this slowing the flow. So as it's travelling down the channels, clearly it's building, it's collecting, it's increasing its flow. So if you can take some of it away, and the timing of it means it falls further down the channels later on, it means it flattens those peaks that occur. And once the peak occurs, that's when the overflow happens, and that's where infrastructure is impacted, roads are blocked, properties are flooded, and employment aspects are affected. So it's about trying to remove some of that water to reduce the likelihood of those impacts. In terms of, and I'll turn to Sarah on this, in terms of why Harper's Brook and why Wootton Brook, are you able to contribute on that element, please?
Yeah, it was when the bid was put in for this funding. It was the flood officers in County Council at the time that could see through patterns and could see through the engagement they had with these communities, that the Wootton and the Harpers Brook catchments were those most affected, where an engineering a way to alleviate the problems they were having just wasn't available, and they could see that those catchments, due to the mix of river and surface water flooding in them, they would have the biggest impacts with the changes in weather that we're going to experience in the future. So it was those two that were suggested. I think the reason the whole of Northamptonshire wasn't included in that was that they wanted to concentrate the efforts in two catchments to really, really make a difference. If we'd have scattered the measures and the resilience in communities, one, the funding wouldn't have been enough, and two, it just wouldn't have had the same impact. What we're trying to show in Harpers and Wootton Brook is that a holistic approach to flood management works, and the smaller the areas we can concentrate in that, the better chance we have of proving it.
Yeah, and sorry, just to come back. Firstly, thank you for the responses, and fully understand in relation to planning. And I think there's some much major questions in relation to the size, just the sheer size of some of these panels to come, and the impact on these type of schemes generally further downstream, which is where I was trying to make it directly relevant to this, because if something does happen, as I said, top end, what happens to this scheme, whether the money's been. But don't expect an answer, because I appreciate your answer, but the point is, if there's lots of applications going in near the M1 or the top end of Northampton, and somewhere along the line, that's going to have an effect on the flows of water. So, and then what happens to this project? But I appreciate you. I was just making that point, Simon. I appreciate your response. The other thing, Chair, is I didn't expect the whole of the county to get the funding, and I appreciate it's good to concentrate on one area. So thank you for that. It wasn't a question. I just wanted to understand why, not question why. It's a big difference. Because obviously if it does work somewhere, then it can be carried elsewhere. And I can't see why it wouldn't, because there's, if we can do a natural flood management solution to this and it works, then there's nothing wrong with areas in Kettering or Wellingborough or the Nen, or Neen or Nen, where obviously this can obviously be done as well. I don't want to get in trouble on that one. This could be done as well, Chair. So again, I wasn't suggesting the whole county. It was just an understanding. So hopefully, this could be carried on in the future. So thank you.
So much of what we're doing is constrained by funding, and of course, the whole Neen catchment area could well benefit from all of this, but we probably don't. Unfortunately, it's difficult to get the funding that would meaningfully be able to work with all that massive catchment area, including Harpers Brook, including the Eyes, including all the various tributaries. it would be very difficult. But yeah, we keep trying, and we keep lobbying, and of course the government's got pressures all over the country. It's not just us. You know, there are, if you know, you go to the Severn catchment area, it's huge problems. The Trent, you know, there's big problems, mostly in the southern half of Great Britain. Interestingly, rainfall is massively increased in the south and east of Great Britain, sort of the Midlands and further south and east, whereas Scotland, particularly, is receiving less rainfall. It's sort of interesting. So, you know, whether that is global warming, whether that is a long-term permanent feature, and a lot of people think it is, then we're going to have to factor it in. If it isn't, then it may change. But at the moment, it does seem that we are going to be getting much wetter, warmer winters and more rainfall. So, interesting. Did anybody else want to add to that? Yeah, well, always be optimistic, my friend, always. So
yeah, my only final point on that would be that recognising that funding is limited, we've got a stronger chance of being able to secure that funding if we're able to demonstrate that we understand the causes, and we've been able to outline proposals that can help to alleviate or soften the impacts of flooding and make the area more resilient. So through carrying out this work, this study, learning from others, it means that the opportunity to secure the funding should be better.
Yeah, thank you. Robin, you've been extremely patient.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of things. Picking up on Stephen's thing about we are slightly losing some of the floodplains a little bit more. We're starting to build a bit on some of these, which causes one of the problems. Another thing is, which is a good thing, the ponds, farmers' ponds. I think there's one county where they are now looking into this more and clearing them, which is one of the things which is easing the pressure of the water, because you've got better ponds, the water goes into these ponds, so it's not going straight into the streams and that. So I think we should be encouraging that, because the farmers, at the end of the day, they've got the equipment to clear these ponds and make them bigger. Because if you look around the county, we are, you know, everywhere we have got lots and lots of ponds. So that would ease a lot of pressure. The other thing is, would it be good to sort of pay the farmers or to have a flood area? Because I think that's been done in certain areas before, where they just flood a certain amount of fields, which another way of easing the pressure. So I don't know if we are looking at that idea.
Yeah, what happens when we go out and visit a farm? We have a farmer on our team. He goes out and visits a farmer. They have a good sort of walk around the farm. They sit around and have a cup of tea and talk about what that farm could do to help with flood alleviation. And sometimes those are clearing out ponds, sorting out ditches, sort of general maintenance work, and that can be discussed. And then when those elements are sorted, then we can really talk about putting new measures on there, funding them, and just giving the farmers some sort of encouragement to do that. So yes, that's something we definitely look at. With regards to ponds, we look more at areas where water can go when we have high levels of rain. The ones that are full all the time don't particularly help flooding. They're great for biodiversity, so they're lovely to see. But with regards to flooding, we want open areas that are dry when it's dry and wet when it's wet, so that water can be held back.
I think actually the contribution that this project is making to biodiversity is something we should, we've been focusing on, quite rightly, on flooding and, the negative impacts. But, so there's such a lot of work that you're doing on natural flood defences, on improving biodiversity, wetlands, places for visiting birds and all that. And that's, I think, something we should also very much welcome. Handy stuff, especially in terms of the biodiversity net gain requirement that came in last year. Was it last year or year before? You know, for all new development. So useful stuff. Okay. Any other comments? Anybody? Simon, do you want to?
Yeah, I wanted to call on Sarah again, actually. I can't find the bit in the report. But I'm aware that ploughing techniques can make a difference as well. So, so this is where, dependent upon the slope of the land, if you plough up the slope, obviously when it rains, the water just rushes straight down the channels and runs straight into those ditches and brooks at the same time, fills it up and causes further problems. If you plough across the slope, the water doesn't. The furrow of the plough captures that water, holding it back, slowing the flow, which follows on from those principles. And I don't know so much about it, but I know that I see so many more beans being planted in agricultural fields, and then they're not as a crop. It's planted and then subsequently ploughed back in as it been cover crops. That's it, and it brings about further benefits. So I think my understanding is that Sarah undersells the benefit of the farmer that's involved with them in the group, and the ability to actually engage in that community that works out very busy, often isolated, and he's able to communicate on a different level to the likes of others, and able to persuade and engage and provide support in some ways, at times some of it being financial, to go about convincing them to use their land to help to support other communities in the area. So I think, you know, those aspects are things that you and I may not be able to do, but actually, if you're in that environment and in that community, you are able to provide that benefit.
That's a good point. And of course, the point you make about ploughing fields is absolutely right. It's bad if you're a taxi driver, because it means if you're a tractor driver, because it means you've got a list to starboard all the time. But if you plough across the grain of the land, across the slope, then it will mitigate the flow. Whereas if you do it vertically, just done nothing to stop it. Look, there's a good deal of expertise here. I think our tractor enthusiasts are vying with each other.
Because my brother's a farmer. Sorry. A lot of problem now, though, because they don't plough so much now, because they just let it die off and then go over it. And that's probably the reason we are, because the water's just washing straight off land now. So whether that might be encourage the farmers to plough the opposite way, so you do stop. But sometimes it's that's their demand of doing time. It's easier just to go, not do anything, and just let everything die down and seed it, and that's it. So I think, do we encourage farmers to plough or do something? But then again, we can't tell a farmer what to do.
Well, within RAIN, what we're encouraging is a kind of more of a regenerative agricultural approach. That does entail less ploughing because it releases less carbon. So one of the reasons we would encourage less ploughing and more planting is the carbon element. Cover cropping is particularly good because, one, it covers the field and stops the perennial weeds getting in, so there's less chemical needed. And also it benefits the soil. So what I think is sometimes not realised enough is that if a good quality soil will take in a lot more flood water than probably a wetland. So it's about encouraging farmers to improve their soil, and one of those, unfortunately, is reduction in ploughing and more in planting. So that's what we're encouraging, but I'm certainly not saying what's right and what's wrong.
Yeah, just a quick one, Chair. Just very quickly. Just picking on what Simon mentioned in the last bit, and in relation to the work that And I appreciate we were talking about funding in other areas and different groups. I mean, one of the issues that, springs to my mind point of view, Chair, is, as you're aware, the Rushton Zoo is about 5 years behind schedule. But a huge part of that, of course, is the SSSI and the 3 mile or 6 mile exclusion zone and all relation to all the work that has to be protected. Now, as far as I know, we're still negotiating that 106 agreement. And, always one for thinking, Chair, there, that so much has to be done there in relation to, protecting the Nen or Nin the way through, the SSSI, the mitigation in relation to wildlife. And I just wondered, not in spite, but understanding all that you've said about funding and the different rounds, there would be considerable sums of money invested in that area from the developers, because it is obviously a major zoo that's supposed to still be happening. And I'm just wondering, you might have thought about it already, Chair, Simon, but if there's any way of actually possibly in the future utilising RAIN in relation to the 106 agreements or the funding we get from the developers to actually make some vast improvements to the water flow or the water runoff in relation to the SSSI before it's even built, as it's a major, obviously hard-standing area addition to the Rushton area, and obviously not very far from the SSSI and the importance of all that area. It's just any where we could actually utilise in the future because of the delay, where there's an opportunity there, Chair.
Couldn't agree with you more, because it is very conveniently located for Nene Valley and, of course, for SSSI. And as you rightly say, if a project's built out, I mean, we're talking, was it 3,000 homes, there will be substantial developer contributions required. And yes, I totally take on board what you've said. I don't know if, I think Simon was nodding there. So yes, absolutely. And obviously yes, I mean, I was a young chap when the Rushton Zoo was first proposed many thousands of years ago. Yeah, it seems so. And progress is being made, but it's slowly. But it's helpful because, of course, going into the next part of our discussion, of course, it's a major part of our 5-year housing land supply, and so we do need to move on it. Anyway, but thank you. I think that's a valid point. Okay, are there any other thoughts or comments from anybody on this issue? In which case, yeah, Simon.
One thought came to mind was, I know Sarah's offered to show me the site and see at first hand the proposals, the locations, the impacts and so on for those that may not be familiar. And so I was wondering whether it's worthwhile offering it out to members. We don't get out very much.
No.
And
we're frousting indoors mostly.
But it provides an opportunity, and if we're it improves our knowledge, gives us gains, and we can show our allegiance and support to the proposal.
Well, I think it would be really interesting, and subject to everybody's agreement, diaries and all the rest of it, and the provision of a decent pair of wellies each. I think it's very much to be welcomed. All right. Well, at the recommendation at 3.1, if I'm correct, go back. Yeah, recommendation at 3.1 is that we note the contents of the report and work being led by the RAIN team, providing comment and governance for continued delivery of projects, bringing support to communities in the Harpers Brook catchment and the benefit of reduced flood risk for the communities. I think we can more or less all agree with that, I think. So I'd just like to conclude this item by thanking you very much, Sarah, for coming, for listening to our remarks, whether joined up or not, and well done for all that you're doing and your team's doing, and do keep us in the loop, do keep us informed and up to date, because as I say, maybe it's a little bit of a small acorn from which mighty oak trees are born, but you're, doing really important work on the Harpers Brook. And so if we, with funding, you can expand that project into other areas, I'm sure that they will welcome it very much too. All right, well, thank you. Okay, we are now sticking loosely to the agenda. We now have item 5, Executive Forward Plan, which you will see is in front of you. And what do we have? There's a number of items coming up on Thursday, as you see. Ones that will affect or might affect this EAP. You will see there is an item on the Knights Farm Rushton, an overage agreement. Essentially, the Rushton Sue is actually in 2 parts. There is a smaller proposed development of approximately 500 units being proposed by one organisation, and we have what's called an overage agreement with them, by which if planning permission is granted to develop that site out, the landowner, the value of that land will very much increase, as you would expect, because it would have planning permission for development. And the council has a share in what's called an overage agreement. So if that planning permission is granted and the value of the land vastly increases, then NNC will get a proportion of that increase. I think that's about correct. So that will be going to the executive on Thursday. The other one, which is of some significance, and we've touched on it already, is a paper seeking authority to respond to consultations and engagement from the developer and the planning inspectorate on Green Hill Solar Farm. We touched on it earlier, but Green Hill Solar Farm, for those of you who don't know, is a very substantial 500 megawatt proposed solar farm in a number of locations stretching from approximately Lavenden in Buckinghamshire right past up past Beaujert, past Mears Ashby, going between Wellingborough and Northampton, and ending up around near Old in West Northamptonshire, with a number of substantial sites of solar panels, plus a very substantial proposed substation and grid interlink, battery storage, and so on and so forth, in the Grendon area, which itself would be about 25 hectares or 50 acres. So it's, we're talking a really substantial site. Because it is in excess of 50 megawatts, this site is considered to be a project of national significance. And so the planning application will be determined by the Secretary of State or by the Planning Inspectorate acting on behalf of the Secretary of State. North Northamptonshire Council, insofar as we are concerned, are considered to be a hosting authority. So we do all the work, and our officers have to respond to all the various engagement and consultations and so on, and already have done so. And we are, of course, a substantial consultee and will be giving evidence, because when this comes for determination, there will be a planning inquiry led by a senior planning inspector. So, of course, NNC will be responding both to the various consultations and requests for documents and information and evidence, and for the actual inspection when it happens. But the application will be determined by the Planning Inspectorate on behalf of the Secretary of State. It will be, of course, called a Development Consent Order rather than a simple grant of planning permission. The idea being it's a project of national importance. It's a bit like a third runway at Heathrow or something like that, and therefore the Planning Inspectorate will be gauging the the harm that such a project may do to the local environment against the benefit that the upside of that project would provide to the national economy and national infrastructure. So that's it in a nutshell. The actual paper seeks delegated authority for the Executive Director of Place and Economy, that's Mr. Candler, in consultation with myself to respond to the various consultations at the various times that these are given. I hasten to add, it won't just be the two of us doing that. It will be properly dealt with by the relevant departments and relevant planning experts and other stakeholders as these things arise. So that is going to be an interesting little paper. There is another paper later on update and review of minerals and waste planning policies and proposals. That's February. Oh, is it? Okay, that will be put back to February. Sorry? Yeah, I know, but these things do chop and change a bit. But yeah, okay. Anyway, that's January. Then February, yes, there will be a discussion on the minerals and waste planning policies proposals, and that paper will come in February. And I'm going to have some fun and games with Hackney Carriage dezoning and the private hire and Hackney Carriage licensing policy, but that's not really for this EAP, but it'll be good fun anyway. You'll probably see smoke rising from where the meeting takes place. And I think that is Swywell Country Park Reservoir drawdown. That's an interesting one. That's the member for Climate and Green Environment. The ability to lower the water level of a reservoir. That's actually quite interesting. I don't know about that. Okay. Are there any thoughts or comments on the forward plan? Stephen?
Yeah, just checked on the diaries, so that's my doing, but are we meeting again before the waste minerals plan goes to the FEB exec?
Possibly not, but obviously we have the sort of, we can quickly touch on it now because we have the sort of option of a single plan for all of Northamptonshire, or trying to go it alone and having two plans, one for the west and one for north.
Well, that was my concern, Chair. Because,
okay.
Obviously I was in your role when it last came up, and it'd just be interesting to see which way we're looking at going if we're not going to meet again beforehand.
Well, Simon will quickly touch on this, but I think we're. Go on, Simon.
So, Chair, the recommendation to that report is that we work with the West in providing a minerals and waste local plan that meets the requirements of both authorities. So we work together, benefits being economies of scale, largely. I think that's the headlines that are there, and we through that also identify a suitable local development scheme, so a timetable to enable that to progress.
Yeah, Stephen?
From recollection, and obviously I haven't got it in front of me, but one of the issues I think I raised at the time and still have is there was a disproportion of where those sites were around the county. And that was I think that was my concern then, and it's still my concern now.
And so long, I hear what you say on that, but so long as the evidence base is robust, that a site is a proper site, viable and so on, and we're not being sort of dumped on and ignoring viable sites in the west and sort of putting them all in the east or in North Northamptonshire. So long as that evidence base covers all of Northamptonshire using the same criteria, I wouldn't have a problem with having one plan, so long as it is equitable. If it isn't, that would be a cause for concern, certainly. Steve.
Thanks, Chair. I appreciate it's not a debate, but we're not getting a chance again. I think one of the issues are, you do have that issue of, all the extractions in one part of the county, and with all the house building going on, and in relation to how that affects the geography of the county, because you're taking obviously all the movement of that material across the county, and from my recollection, because clearly I haven't looked at it for a long time, is it was disproportionate to to this part of the county, as you've just highlighted. So it was just that concern, certainly with all the extraction going on, of where end up all, and then obviously what happens after that extraction. And from memory, again, from my understanding, it was completely disproportionate across the county.
Okay. Well, I don't know if you wanted to comment on that, Simon.
I agree in terms of the referring back to the evidence and the information involvement going through that process. The other point, though, that I'm aware of is that the messaging coming through is that the industry isn't as interested in Northamptonshire and that, in your example, Northamptonshire, because of the challenges of accessing the minerals within our sites. It's not as cost effective as other parts of the country. But my thoughts are we need to play that out and work collectively with the West to ensure that it gets a proper, thorough exploration, so that we're able to allocate those sites that are attractive, and it's fair and balanced in the approach taken. Yeah.
Well, thank you, but thank you for your concern, because I know it's been raised, throughout the lifetime of this council. I remember we were talking about this, back in East Northamptonshire days, and certainly subsequently. So yeah, it's important that you raise that, and it's important that's taken into consideration. When making our minds up as to which policy to adopt, but B, whichever policy is adopted, to make sure that the allocation of sites is suitably, considered, and not necessarily, put in one location. I mean, obviously, it's got to be a viable site, and there's got to be stuff there for it to be quarried. And if there's, and I'm not a geologist, but running down a river from where it rises to the sea, the river gets wider as you go downstream, so it's more likely that there's going to be more mineral further down. But, again, that's something that more people on a somewhat higher pay grade than I need to think about. Okay, any other comments on the Executive Forward Plan? Right, well, in that case, thank you all very much. I think we've had a very useful discussion. Once again, thank you, Sarah, and do come. Don't be a stranger. Do come and tell us what's going on. And with that, at 12:08, I declare the formal part of the meeting closed. So I think, why don't we take a few minutes